Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar that will review the Federal Reduction of Lead in Drinking Water Act, answer your questions, and offer suggestions on how distributors can comply with the legislation, as well as understand how it will impact your customers. Please note that this webinar is being recorded for replay. Everyone registered for this webinar will receive a follow-up email message from me with notification as to when the replay is available, as well as instructions on how to access it and the presentation slides. I'm Chris Murin, Executive Director of WANE and ASA, and before we get underway, I'd like to remind everyone that one of our strategic goals is that ASA will be the recognized voice of the industry as it pertains to legislative initiatives, regulatory compliance, workforce advancement, political intelligence, and employee safety in the workplace. Since 2010, Dan Hilton has been a member of the ASA staff representing your interests full-time on Capitol Hill as our Director of Government Affairs. Thanks to support from WANE, as well as individual members, Dan works every day on your behalf, meeting with members of Congress and their staffs, collaborates with numerous stakeholders aligned with our interests, including the Get the Lead Out Consortium, and engages individual ASA members directly on specific issues, as well as with his weekly e-letter, Washington Weekly. It's now my pleasure to introduce our presenter and an all-around great guy, John Kirkland, Vice President of Sales for Legend Valve. John will present this morning's webinar on behalf of the Get the Lead Out Consortium, a team of industry professionals who are actively promoting outreach in the form of training and marketing initiatives to help the industry transition and comply with the lead-free or no-lead legislation, including interpretation, manufacturing issues, and installation. John will also be sure to review key differences between some federal and state no-lead mandates, as well as language to be added to Section 1417 of the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. He'll also share some important information about standards and codes, no-lead alloys, and soldering materials, product identification, and enforcement. Now, before I turn it over to John, I want to make sure that everybody is clear that he or she is encouraged to pose questions throughout this presentation. While it would be very difficult to have all of us on a conference call, your GoToWebinar control panel includes window panes in which you may pose questions and even chat with other participants through the use of your computer's keyboard. These window panes are labeled Chat and Questions. I'll help John to monitor the control panel for your questions, and periodically he'll be asking us if we have any for him. By the way, you can minimize and maximize the GoToWebinar control panel by clicking on the orange arrow in the upper left-hand corner, as this will make it easier for you to see the entire presentation slide and not cover up anything on the screen. So John, why don't you take it away?
Thank you very much, Chris. And I want to say a warm welcome to all that are attending today. First and foremost, many of you have a lot of questions. I believe that the highest level, we're going to cover a lot of the detail this morning that will allow you to better get your arms wrapped around this federal challenge, as I might put it. At the bottom of the slide here, you're going to note a website which is titled GetTheLeadOutPlumbing.com. I want to encourage you to visit the website. A version of this particular PowerPoint with a lot more greater detail is contained on the website. There's also information such as resource information that would address frequently asked questions. So please note this website. I would like now to call to your attention bear with me one second here, call to your attention the consortium partners, whom Chris called out this association and what it's a part of. The list includes the American Society of Plumbing Engineers, ASPE, the American Supply Association, of course, the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials, IAPMO, the International Code Council, the ICC, manufacturer partners, Legend Valve, Milwaukee Valve, NIPCO, Plumbing and Heating, Cooling Contractors, the National Association, which is the PHCC, who has devoted a lot of energies to this presentation, and the Education Foundation within the PHCC. It also includes the PMI, the Plumbing Manufacturers International, Reliance Worldwide, Viga, LLC, and Watts Water Technologies. Before we begin, just to cover some housekeeping issues that we need to do as an association. The presentation was developed by members of the Get the Lead Out Plumbing Consortium to provide education of the industry stakeholders to promote understanding and compliance. And again, I understand Chris covered this with you in the beginning of the presentation. Just need to get a quick reminder in here. with the Reduction of Lead in Drinking Water Act, which goes into effect in January 2014. Again, the presentation is for information purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. Should any party need legal advice regarding the information contained herein, they should contact their own counsel who specializes in this area of law. The Consortium will not enter into any discussions related to product, material selection, distribution, or pricing of lead-free plumbing products in accordance with the established antitrust guidelines. An overview of the presentation today, the webinar, is broken down into 5 areas. First will be the law and its background, interpretation issues relative to the law, manufacturing issues surrounding the development of new lead-free products, installation considerations for properly installing new lead-free products, and preparing for implementation of the law. The Federal Lead-Free Law, Reduction of Lead in Drinking Water Act, the timeline. This particular bill was signed into law on January 4th, 2011, with a 3-year implementation date with an effective date of January 4th, 2014. This amends the Safe Drinking Water Act, which changes this specifically to reflect the no lead designation. The amended definition of lead-free is provided. Keep in mind there are 2 specific areas. First would be 0.20% max for solder and flux, and 0.25 max lead for products by weighted average. Keep in mind solder and flux under one category. Other products would be under a second, 0.20 and 0.25. This could be rather confusing, but it will allow you to better understand what I'm going to explain to you, how this is calculated. Multiple component products, meaning that it could be any one part, piece, or component, whether it be in a PRV valve or, for that matter, in a ball valve, a gate, a check. These are relative to areas that are exposed to the wetted or the water surface. So I'm going to read this to you. Multiple component products are calculated to address total wetted exposure based upon wetted surface area of each component and that component's lead content by percentage. What that's stating to you is the calculation is determined based upon the wetted surface where water is directly coming in contact with that valve fitting or component. So in other words, you could have components within a valve that don't come in direct contact with the water that's being delivered, which would not be impacted by this law. It's relative to wetted surface. There are exemptions to the federal law. Some of them will be obvious to you. Others you'll question. The EPA is working to define or redefine the specifics associated with this, but we're going to give it to you because the law itself right now currently is 1 1/4 pages, which leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Exemptions are identified as follows: pipes, pipe fittings, plumbing fittings, or fixtures, including backflow preventers that are used exclusively, I'm going to emphasize exclusively, for non-potable services such as manufacturing, industrial processing, irrigation, outdoor watering, or any other use where the water is not anticipated to be used for human consumption. Please understand, in this exemption, there is no list of threading, solder cups, anything of that particular nature. This is relative to non-potable services where the anticipated usage is for human consumption. Toilets, bidets, and urinals, again, these are obvious. Fill valves, flush meters, tub fillers, shower valves, service saddles, or water distribution main gate valves that are 2 inches in diameter or larger or exempt. In this particular case, one that would be near and dear to Legend's heart would be 2-inch diameter gate valves or larger. Not sure I can explain that, nor has the EPA at this point, but again, 2-inch gate valves along with a host of additional items covered earlier are under the exemption list. There are key differences between state and federal laws. We want to highlight this, but I believe there's a lot here in the way of interpretation that one could make some general thoughts that would allow them to understand how these really are, in large part, overlapping one another. California, Vermont, Maryland, and Louisiana applies to any product intended to convey or dispense water for human consumption through drinking or cooking. Federal, It applies to any product used in systems where water is anticipated to be used for human consumption. And federal law wording, again, could be interpreted to cover a much broader group of products than state laws. Again, some key takeaways from this particular slide. Water for human consumption through drinking or cooking under the California, Vermont, Maryland, Louisiana, and under the federal, where it notes anticipated. So it's not quite as defined under the federal description as you would find with California, Vermont, Maryland, or Louisiana. As it relates to certifications to ensure that you are complying with this federal no-lead mandate, NSF is the chosen entity whom has been given the task to then certify other parties, which I'll cover in a later slide. But I want to offer this. There are two categories here, in other words, that then allows us to reflect one cert. And if we start with the far left with NSF 61, this evaluates all potential contaminants from drinking water products. And this guideline for contaminants is established by the EPA. Over to your far right is NSF 372. This would define the federal no-lead mandate as follows. It's equal to. It evaluates products for weighted average lead content at 0.25% or less. So to encapsulate NSF 61 today, which is now NSF 61G, which is a combination of 61 and 372, we have a new designation, NSF 61-G. This will conform with the contaminants list as well as the less than 0.25% weighted average. NSF, being the larger body, has also has the benefit of certifying other labs. And I want to call out third-party agency options, meaning that several ANSI accredited agencies can provide certification listings including, which would certify to NSF ANSI 61G. NSF, of course, Truesdale Labs, UL, WQA, IATMO, CSA, Intertech, and ICC Evaluation Service. Keep in mind that when you're reviewing products that you currently purchase for your customers, this is a distributor orientation today, you could find any one of these companies that are certifying to NSF ANSI 61G, and they are accredited to do so. So keep that list close, because you will find that NSF is clearly a very large company, very busy, and many of these labs are needed to get products certified and delivered to the market in a reasonable time frame. The single greatest question today is enforcement of the law. And the EPA implements the law. They establish the law, and that is something that needs to be understood. Enforcement is left to the states. Most states pass responsibility to the counties, the cities, the towns, and municipal utilities, who use health and plumbing codes to drive enforcement. California, on the other hand, requires product certification by an independent third party. The questions that you'll have as a result of the trainings we're doing should be the same. Most of the contractor base that we're dealing with is challenged to understand this and the scope of this law. Even code enforcement officials are still trying to gather and get their arms around this particular law. So we as a whole view this as being a challenge long term, or at least in the short term, till we get through this, till the industry becomes whole, where all our understanding of the federal no-lead mandate, how these products will be passed as far as being acceptable potable systems within homes today or businesses. So much of the details to be worked out. We as an industry need to take a leadership role and do our very best to educate the trade, because as we'll talk later, there are many hurdles they're going to incur without this knowledge. Manufacturing issues. California in particular was the first to experience this. Many companies overseas or that on the localized U.S.-based level had challenges with these no-lead alloys and the difficulties in producing these products to meet the guidelines established in the federal no-lead mandate. We'd like to talk about those with you now. This is an alloy comparison which would allow you to gain an understanding of what some of the difficulties may very well be. First on the list is lead-free bronze brass alloy. More difficult to cast. And to highlight this, why would it be more difficult to cast? The removal of lead from the alloy, whether it's a forging alloy or a cast bronze alloy, creates difficulties in the casting. It's harder to machine, faster machine tool wear because the alloy is harder to work with, which requires more frequent tooling, changing, in addition to production lines that aren't as fruitful as they would normally be. So piece counts on production lines have been reduced, and there's been a major learning curve with this. Harder to press, that would fall on the lines of forging alloys. Again, forgings are quite difficult when lead is removed to work with, and the challenges there were many for companies that forge brass products. Fitting designs accommodates increased hardness, and they work with the same working pressures. Further alloy comparison, standard bronze brass, meaning this is a traditional plumbing material commonplace today, which will no longer exist in the areas of the federal law come next year. Strong copper content, minimal erosion and corrosion. Choose for adapters and transition fittings, or for that matter, valves. This contains lead. Whereas a lead-free bronze brass alloy with 0.25% of lead or less, lead is replaced with bismuth or silicone. This is a harder material, and the benefits would be consistent, which would be minimal erosion and corrosion. You'll see some testing equipment off to your far hand right. One of the more common pieces that are out in the field today with various manufacturers would be a mass spectrometer, which can do in-house alloy breakdown to determine what the exact composition of any one alloy would be. Types of lead-free solutions. There are copper-based alloys, silicon copper alloys, there are bismuth copper alloys, and there are many other alloys. What's not on this list just happens to be a binary alloy, which is very similar to traditional forging alloys. But I believe over time this list could ultimately grow to include other alloys that would meet the federal no-lead requirement. But today the base list would be silicon copper alloys, bismuth copper alloys, in addition to the newest being a binary alloy. There are products that are naturally lead-free, such as engineered plastics and stainless steel. Installation has been a touchy subject. We'd have to break that down to tie that to specific alloys. But something common in the world of lead-free is there can be challenges in soldering. Specifically, firsthand for Legend has been in the larger diameter products that are lead-free. The greater challenge there is working with the mandated ASTM B813 water-soluble fluxes and some of the solders that are out there. Requires even heat distribution, meaning that the alloy is literally, or the solder is worked around the valve or the fitting to ensure the capillary effect, meaning the solder would take hold directly in the joint and a good thorough soldering process would take place. The water-soluble flux, again, is something that you're going to have to be cognizant of, and the typical protocol for standard soldering and fluxing, solder and flux in the pre-prep for valves and fittings is a given. Nothing changes in that area. But keep in mind the B-ASTM 813 water-soluble flux, in addition with a high-quality solder 95.5. A personal recommendation from Legend would be the silver-bearing solders many of you have on your shelves, which is an upgrade over the traditional 95.5. Offers a greater working temperature, typically lower, to achieve a melting point, and typically a wider working range, which means that it will flow in a wider variation of temps. So good stuff to know. The water-soluble flux is designed to be washed through a system where it doesn't remain on the valve or fitting in the areas exposed to potable water, so that corrosion would not negatively impact the water supply. Packaging is critical. There's a lot of ways that products can be marked, although consistency is not necessarily one of the things you're going to find. This varies by manufacturer. It could range in anything from a symbol on the far right of your screen, which is a PB with a circle and a line through it, PB meaning the symbol for lead. This would imply that this is a lead-free product. You'll see a host of other shapes here, such as triangles, or for that matter, a circle with a check, a solid triangle, or more simpler ways of understanding this would be definitions such as LF for lead-free, NL, or the PB with a line through it. As you'll note here, these particular photos and of product as well as packaging are clearly designating that these are lead-free, no lead compliance. Just want to talk briefly about preparing for the law. We're going to cover part of this as it relates to the contractor, which this is truly a distributor related type of presentation where some of the slides have been altered to reflect the areas that you would be most interested in talking about or learning about today. For distributors, developing an action plan, and to discuss what an action plan ultimately means to any one of you, that is a detailed approach to identifying inventory that would be for potable applications, recognizing the current stock levels you have in conjunction with the turns that you enjoy for that product. The goal here with respect to an inventory or an action plan associated with your current inventory that could be negatively impacted would fall directly on the idea of achieving a goal of being at a zero product inventory level no later than the end of this year. Critically important. If that doesn't happen, other aspects of what you can do to address this inventory issue could be as follows. You can reach out to colleagues in states that have already had a changeover. They may possibly have outlets or suggestions as to what they had done with inventory levels that were no longer saleable in their markets. You could communicate with affected vendors. In this case, many have return programs in place. Others may have already closed that window for return of potable product that would be of a leaded nature. Communicate with those vendors. All I would ask for is that you consider their position. Many of them today are having materials returned by as many as 46 different states across the U.S. Everybody's fighting to work through this to minimize the damages that their inventories or their businesses could incur. We all have to understand that at the end, when this is all over, I don't believe in any way, shape, or form that anybody's not going to be impacted. It's going to be an impact in a negative way in a lot of different areas of one's business. This is the nature of the law, and there's little that you can do in that respect other than develop action plans to work through inventory that will no longer be saleable. Understanding the law, potable versus non-potable, this type of presentation is being recorded. It's critical that the frontline personnel in each and every one of your businesses understand this, because the installers today that are installing products of this nature that could be of this type of nature that could be impacted, they are the first line of defense or the first line of communication. And their knowledge that they can share and they can impart on any one of your customers today could be truly beneficial by year end. Clearly identify non-compliant product for employees and customers. Many of you have already started this action plan and have already started the inventory lead-free product in preparation for the day. For those that haven't, we've heard a number of different stories out in the field. Some range where customers are operating on two inventory levels, meaning a compliant product versus a non-compliant. Others are simply selling off non-compliant product and replacing it with a compliant product immediately right now. So the possibility exists for those that are doing so to have a blended inventory with the goal of achieving a totally compliant inventory by year's end. Assess your inventory position and begin with the non-compliant product. I would word it this way, that C and D items, if you're working as a distributor on a traditional inventory turn basis of 4 to 6, it sounds well and good, but today, as it stands, high velocity items may be 7 or 8 turns a year. Some of the C and D items you may only be enjoying 2 turns a year. And if that is the case, that you're carrying non-compliant product and the turn level is on the lower side of that range, you're already at a point of critical mass where those inventories need to be addressed and addressed quickly. Lean on the knowledge base of the manufacturers. Legend, as well as the Consortium members, have participated in presentations abroad across the U.S. Many of you, in particular, we have addressed on an individual basis where we've come to your businesses and helped to do presentations to educate your team and your associates and your entire staff. And even so much so that we've engaged the trade itself. So educating the employees so that they understand the impact and can be a resource for customers is important. Communicate with customers early and often. If you haven't started the conversation with your contractor trade, it's critical you do so today. We're going to talk in the next slide about why the critical nature of this exists. gauge their knowledge and explain the law. They need to understand this. Understanding it will prevent them from suffering financial loss. And we note here expiring existing bids. That's possible. That's one direction you could take. A second would be to look at it one of two ways, or three potentially. One, you would quote under a non-compliant basis, products that are non-compliant. You would have a second quote for compliant product, meeting the federal no-lead law. And thirdly, this is one that we fielded from a multitude of distributors. Many manufacturers are going through rolling change, meaning that as they sell a non-compliant product, it's being replaced with a lead-free product. And the key point here is that could be happening today where you are going to have manufacturers with what I would call a non-compliant and compliant inventory, where they're going to call you and tell you that they are currently sold completely at a zero stock level on a non-compliant product, and they will not be bringing that product back in. It has been replaced with a lead-free product. So keep that in mind. Those are critical points, because on quoting, that could be a difficult hurdle for any one of you to any one challenge that would be difficult to deal with. How are we recommending to approach contractors? A lot of this is a carryover from the previous slide, but they need to be planning right now. Understand the federal law and any state laws that will affect them and know their effective dates. They've got to understand this. Why? One of the questions yesterday that came up was, what do I do if I have a project that is started in 2013 that carries over to 2014? Can I continue to use non-compliant product? Again, much of this is open to interpretation. You would have to read this and interpret it as follows. The effective date is assessed or tied directly to the date of installation. So what it implies is that any product installed after January 4th, 2014 must be lead-free. Know what product categories are included in and exempt from the applicable laws. Learn to identify lead-free product markings and packagings. It's critical for them. They catch it on the front end where they've got a non-compliant product. Maybe they have inventory they haven't moved through their system and installed predating January 4th, 2014. They need to be able to recognize this, because chances are if they install it and it's a large diameter valve or fitting, the cost is significant. The smaller products, the cost is still there. But again, this is protection for them. They can confirm listings with manufacturers and third-party agencies. Be sure that they check their stock. This is a walkthrough opportunity for a distributor to build a partnership. They can take their key customers, walk their shelves, and point out what products are non-compliant that they need to move through the channel, predating the 4th of 2014. Practice proper installation and soldering techniques for lead-free products, and work with suppliers to obtain installation material recommendations and training. This presentation has covered a lot of information for each and every one of you. I believe as a result of what we've covered today, I'm confident that many of you have a greater grasp on the federal no-lead mandate and how it can impact your business, your customer's business, and what are the best actionable items that you can take from this presentation to assist your business. Chris, I want to turn this back over to you.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Does anybody have any questions to pose in the questions box? John, who enforces this law? Ultimately, who's going to be responsible for making sure everybody does what they need to do?
Chris, the law will be enforced at the local level eventually, but currently areas that are being worked through, it's been quoted later this year. Some have mentioned the month of October, whereas a more finite, detailed list of activities or installation protocol will be established. Currently, the federal no-lead law is limited to 1.5 pages, so a lot of the detail today is still being ironed out by the EPA. Many of the local inspectors are still gathering information, trying to best understand how this law impacts the daily responsibilities of their jobs. So the industry is at a big learning curve right now as it stands, and those that are the furthest away from the likes of the distributor, ASA, and companies that are a part of this consortium are the most challenged for information. That's why it's critical that we get to them.
So if it's going to be October before the EPA issues its compliance guidelines, that could make it difficult for people to comply if they've been complying, think they've been complying one way or haven't been at all.
And that is why the Consortium is recommending legal counsel. In large part, much of this is open to interpretation, but the key takeaways here that I think anybody can clearly understand is, this is water being used for being distributed for human consumption. So much of that is easy to understand. Obviously, if cooking or drinking water, tap water is being drawn from a piping system or a valve that's distributing water for human consumption, another key word, it's easy to understand that. Many of the distributors have had questions associated with garden hose threading. My manufacturer sells a Silcock that has a garden hose thread. We read the law in its entirety, the detail at least, and under no way, shape, or form is there anything spelled out with threading or types of connections. It's relative to anticipated use for human consumption or for human consumption, cooking or drinking. So it's clearly stated, and you're always going to want to err on the side of caution. I think that's the best advice we could give anybody. The last thing you'd want to hear is that you interpreted this incorrectly and it negatively impacted your customer, the end user, the contractor, because ultimately that would end up reflecting poorly on you and more than likely result in labor claims or reimbursement for products and services rendered on their part where they have to duplicate that effort a second time. So again, err on the side of caution until any more detail is provided. Otherwise, you risk having a problem in the field. Chris?
I'll ask one last time. Any more questions? Well, seeing none, thank you, John, for an excellent overview, and thank you, everybody, for participating in today's webinar about the Reduction of Lead in Drinking Water Act. Again, this webinar has been recorded for replay, and all of you will receive a follow-up email message from me with notification as to when the replay is available, as well as instructions on how to access it and the presentation slides. Usually it takes about 72 hours to complete the download and then the upload. In the meantime, please be reminded that ASA's next webinar is scheduled to begin at 11 o'clock Eastern on this Thursday morning, April 11th, and you're not going to want to miss it. Our PHCP and industrial PVF economist, Alan Bolio, with Industry Trends Research, will update members with his look ahead at the macroeconomic and regional environments, and specifically how they affect WANE and ASA members. Key industry trends, interest rates, areas of concern, and where opportunities can be found will also be shared. There'll be ample opportunity for questions and answers and for learning how each company can incorporate rate of change into their planning process. Please contact Ladelia Berger in my office at lberger, L-B-E-R-G-E-R, @asa.net to register. Lastly, please mark your calendars to participate in WANE's next event, the 2013 Executive Leadership Conference on June 26th through the 28th at the Sheraton Society Hill in Philadelphia. The hotel reservation and event registration deadline is May 24th, and if you've not already seen the brochure, you will find complete information on the industry calendar available online at www.asa.net. I'm Chris Murin, Executive Director of WANE and ASA, and this webinar is now concluded. Good morning.